In the mud-soaked nightmare of the Western Front, where machine guns shredded bodies and artillery erased landscapes, there existed a weapon so brutally effective at close range that it broke the unwritten, emotional rules of warfare. It wasn't a massive gun turret or a new type of gas. It was a shotgun. The Winchester Model 1897, a civilian tool redesigned for war. And when American troops arrived in 1917, bringing fresh strength, unbroken morale, and this strange new firearm into the trenches, everything changed. Designed by engineer William Eager, the trench gun wasn't elegant, but it was devastatingly practical. Short-barreled, rugged, and chambered for buckshot that spread like a swarm of angry bees, it was built for one purpose: clearing the tight, suffocating spaces where rifles failed. But what made the Germans fear it most was its slam-fire capability, the ability to hold the trigger down and pump shells continuously without resetting. In the choking darkness of trench raids, it became a portable storm. At Seicheprey in April 1918, when American units first unleashed the shotgun in significant numbers, the effect was immediate and horrifying. German soldiers who had survived years of artillery bombardments now faced Americans charging forward, firing 5 shells in seconds, each shell containing multiple lethal projectiles. To them, it was chaos, it was unfair, it was inhuman, and that fear turned into rage. By September 1918, Germany filed an official diplomatic protest claiming the trench shotgun violated the Hague Convention, arguing that buckshot caused unnecessarily painful wounds. But America's response, delivered by Secretary of State Robert Lansing and reinforced by acting Judge Advocate Samuel Ansell, was cold, clear, and unapologetic. The shotgun was lawful. The implication was even sharper. Germany had no moral standing to lecture anyone after deploying poison gas. Meanwhile, on the front lines, legends were born. Men like Lloyd Seibert, who stormed enemy positions with the trench gun in hand, earning the Medal of Honor. His weapon didn't just kill, it shattered morale. Soldiers whispered about it. Commanders warned about it. Some German units were rumored to surrender rather than face Americans armed with it. Because the shotgun didn't just wound, the sound of its pump echoed like a promise: there is nowhere to hide. And long after the armistice stopped the guns, the trench shotgun refused to disappear. It roared again in Normandy hedgerows, Pacific jungles, Korean night ambushes, and the tunnel warfare of Vietnam. A symbol of brutal efficiency, a relic of innovation born from desperation. And in the end, the question remains, why did Germany hate the shotgun so much? Because in a war built on distance and industrial killing, this weapon forced combat back into the raw, primal terror of face-to-face survival, where skill, strength, and sheer will determined who walked away. The year is 1918, and the world has never seen killing like this. Europe has become a graveyard of mud, wire, and ruined cities, where millions of young men cling to life in trenches carved across France. The air smells of cordite, rot, and fear. Artillery shakes the earth day and night. Machine guns cut down entire generations in seconds. Gas drifts silently through no man's land, burning throats and lungs. The Western Front is not just a battlefield. It is a mechanized slaughterhouse, a place where strategy has collapsed into attrition, and where every yard of dirt is paid for in blood. Into this exhausted war, late and unbroken, comes a new force, the American Expeditionary Forces. Fresh-faced, confident, unscarred by years of trench warfare, they move with a kind of swagger the Allies haven't felt in years. Among them are the men of the 26th Yankee Division, sent to the shattered French village of Seicheprey. The Germans expect them to be inexperienced, fragile, nothing more than replacement bodies to feed the grinder. But the Americans carry something unexpected, something unlike the bolt-action rifles and long-range artillery dominating the war: the Winchester Model 1897 trench shotgun. A weapon originally built for ranchers, lawmen, and civilians, and now modified for the dirt, blood, and tight spaces of trench combat. Behind its introduction is a man few soldiers would ever know, William Eager, a practical engineer working far from the front. His mindset is simple, not about elegance or tradition, but survival. He studies the war and sees what European officers cannot. Rifles are nearly useless at bayonet distance, when a man rounds a corner and is suddenly face-to-face with an enemy. He pushes the idea. Take the reliable civilian shotgun, shorten the barrel, add a bayonet lug, heat shield, and crucially preserve its unique ability to slam fire. Hold the trigger, and with every pump of the action, the weapon fires 5 shells in seconds, each shell filled with multiple projectiles that spread outward like a lethal burst of shrapnel. It's not precise, it's not gentlemanly, but in a trench, it is perfect. Soldiers like Private Lloyd Seibert, a young but fearless infantryman, understand instantly what this new weapon means. Seibert is the kind of man the war seems designed to destroy, yet he refuses to break. During a brutal engagement, wounded and under fire, he charges forward with a trench gun in his hands and sheer will in his chest. Every pump of the shotgun clears space, terrorizing defenders. His courage earns him the Medal of Honor, but the weapon itself earns something stranger, a diplomatic protest from Germany. Because at Seicheprey, during the first major American engagement using these weapons, the effect is immediate and terrifying. German stormtroopers, elite hardened and experienced, find themselves cut apart at distances where rifles fumble and bayonets tangle. They are used to predictable tools of war, controlled, deliberate, distant. But this weapon turns combat into chaos. Rooms are cleared instantly. Trenches fall silent faster than artillery can track. Soldiers whisper about Americans who can fire 5 deadly blasts before a bolt-action rifle can cycle twice. To German officers, the shotgun represents something unacceptable, not just deadly efficiency, but a shift in the rules of killing. And so, in September 1918, Germany sends an official letter claiming the weapon violates the Hague Convention, alleging unnecessary suffering and unlawful wounds. The protest lands on the desk of U.S. Secretary of State Robert Lansing, who responds coldly. He reminds Germany that a nation using poison gas cannot speak of ethics. The Americans will not ban the shotgun. They will use it until the war is won. That is why this story matters. Because in a conflict where technology stripped humanity from killing, the shotgun reintroduced something primal, raw, close, personal fear. It challenged tradition, forced new tactics, and created a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. And its echo didn't end in 1918. Its legacy marched through Normandy, Korea, and Vietnam. This is the story of the shotgun Germany tried to outlaw. Before the shotgun controversy exploded into diplomatic outrage, the world had already been burning for nearly 4 years. By the time the United States entered the First World War in 1917, Europe had collapsed into a nightmare of mud, misery, and mechanized slaughter. The early optimism of the war, the belief that it would be short, decisive, and glorious, had rotted away beneath endless barbed wire mass graves and the choking fog of poison gas. The Western Front was now a place where the living envied the dead. Trenches stretched across France like infected scars, packed with exhausted British, French, and now American soldiers staring across mere yards of no man's land at dug-in German forces doing the same. The fighting had become ritualistic and predictable, artillery barrages that shook the soul, machine gun fire that cut down any charge, and poison gas that turned lungs into drowning organs. It was here, in the pressure cooker of close-quarters trench combat, that a brutal truth became clear. Traditional weapons were failing. Bolt-action rifles like the German Mauser 98 and American Springfield M1903 were precise and deadly at range, but in the cramped, twisting trenches they were awkward, slow, and almost useless. Bayonets tangled in mud, pistols lacked stopping power, grenades were effective but imprecise and dangerous to use in the dark. Something was missing, something built for sudden, violent encounters. While European armies kept fighting with old doctrine, one man thousands of miles from the front saw the gap clearly, William Eager, a quiet, practical engineer working for the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Eager wasn't thinking about elegance or tradition. He was thinking about physics, speed, and what would happen when two terrified soldiers met face to face in a tunnel barely wide enough for one. He knew that a civilian tool, the Winchester Model 1897 shotgun, could be transformed into something the trenches were not prepared for. When American officers tested the concept, their reactions were immediate. This wasn't a rifle, it wasn't a sidearm, it was a thunderclap in a confined space, a weapon that made hesitation fatal. Modified with a shorter barrel, heat shield, bayonet mount, and loaded with buckshot, the shotgun became something new, the trench gun. And then came the most controversial feature, slam fire. Hold the trigger, rack the pump, and the gun fires every time the action closes. 5 shells in just seconds. 5 blasts, each containing multiple lead pellets with devastating spread. A single pull and pump could shred an enemy squad at distances measured not in yards but in footsteps. As these weapons were issued, the men who carried them changed too. Among them were the soldiers of the 26th Yankee Division, ordinary young Americans, farmers, factory workers, mechanics, now thrust into one of the most brutal environments humanity had ever engineered. They trained with curiosity at first, laughing at how familiar the weapon felt, like something used to hunt birds or defend a home. But when they practiced clearing trench mazes, bunkers, and dugouts, their laughter faded. This weapon wasn't for distance. It wasn't for warning shots. It was for a moment of fear, violence, and finality. Meanwhile, across the lines, the German army, disciplined, experienced, and hardened by years of combat, watched American forces arrive with skepticism. They expected inexperience, naivety, a lack of trench survival instincts. But in April 1918, at the ruined village of Seicheprey, the Germans would learn that the Americans were not just fresh, they were unpredictable. The skirmish began like many others, probing fire, movement through fog, and the eerie silence before an attack. The atmosphere was suffocating, mud swallowing boots, the stink of decay rising from shallow graves, and the constant fear that death could come silently or explosively. Then, as close-quarter fighting erupted, something new echoed through the trenches, not the crack of rifles or the chatter of machine guns, but a deep, violent boom, followed by another, then another. The sound was unmistakable, rhythmic, almost mechanical. German soldiers later described the moment with one word: panic. Their training had prepared them for rifles, bayonets, grenades, but not for a weapon that could turn a corner and unleash a storm of lead faster than they could aim. The first use of the trench shotgun wasn't just a tactical development, it was a psychological earthquake. Because in the dark, cramped, mud-choked tunnels of trench combat, the shotgun wasn't just a weapon. It was certainty that whoever faced it would not survive the next second. And as fear spread through the German ranks, officers scrambled to respond, not just with tactics, but with something far more desperate, a formal attempt to ban the weapon altogether. The stage was set for one of the strangest legal battles in military history. The battlefield had spoken. Now governments would too. And this was only the beginning. The clash at Seicheprey erupted in the cold, mist-choked darkness just before dawn, when German stormtroopers launched a surprise assault meant to overwhelm the newly arrived Americans before they could settle into the rhythm of trench fighting. The air was thick with fog, smoke, and the metallic smell of anticipation. Then the silence shattered as artillery crashed down and flares lit the sky with a hellish glow. German soldiers, hardened by years of trench fighting, surged forward expecting panic and disorder from the inexperienced Yankees. At first, they got exactly that. Shouts, scrambling boots, confusion in the trenches, but then something changed. The Americans didn't break. They dug in, and suddenly a new sound rolled through the trenches, one the Germans had never heard in war. Boom, cha-chunk, boom, cha-chunk. The Winchester Model 1897 trench gun roared to life. Private Lloyd Seibert, already bleeding from shrapnel and choking on the taste of cordite, pumped his shotgun with one hand and fired with the other, clearing a trench turn where German troops thought they had surprise on their side. Soldiers later recalled seeing his face through the smoke, jaw clenched, eyes burning with adrenaline, not fighting from fear, but from sheer refusal to die. Other Americans followed his lead, holding the trigger and pump firing as fast as they could move their arms. 5 shells in seconds. 5 blasts sending multiple pellets across the narrow earth walls, every shot capable of dropping one man or several. It was like being hit by the earth itself, one German survivor would later say. Panic rippled through German ranks as they realized rifles were nearly useless in tight quarters against something this fast and violent. Grenades went off blindly, machine guns tried to reposition, but the trenches offered no clean lines of fire, only corners, choke points, and sudden face-to-face confrontations where the shotgun ruled. Muzzle flashes lit the muddy corridors like lightning in a storm. Men screamed, boots slipped on blood-slick earth, barbed wire snagged uniforms and skin as soldiers tried to retreat or push forward. The Americans fought like men possessed, not just defending their position but counterattacking, moving trench to trench with brutal purpose. The turning point of the fight came when a German squad attempted to regroup and push toward a communication trench, believing the weapon causing such devastation must have limited ammunition or could jam under thick battlefield grime. They were wrong. An American corporal waited at the corner, hand locked on the trigger, already pumping. The first blast dropped the lead Germans instantly. The second tore through the men behind them. The survivors broke and ran, not in formation, not in disciplined withdrawal, but in raw terror. Officers screamed at them to stop, to turn, to regroup, but fear had devoured reason. Some surrendered the moment they saw the short-barreled shotgun pointed their direction, hands shaking in the cold air. The battle slowed as morning light broke through the haze, revealing destruction in every direction, shattered rifles, twisted bodies caught in wire, helmets half buried in mud. The Germans withdrew stunned that a small American force had held the ground against an experienced assault. And yet the most shocking development was not on the battlefield but afterward, in German command posts, where officers held emergency discussions about the weapon that had turned close-quarters combat into slaughter. One report described it as excessively cruel, another called it inhumane, and another simply stated, "No soldier can defend against it." The German High Command, in disbelief that such a brutal tool was allowed in war, prepared a formal protest. To them, this wasn't just a weapon, it was a psychological wrecking ball that shattered morale and violated the unwritten standards of industrialized killing. The Americans, however, saw it differently. In a war defined by poison gas, machine guns, and endless shells, they believed the shotgun represented something raw, honest, and direct: survival. The trenches fell quiet for now, but rumors echoed through every dugout and bunker. The Americans had brought a new kind of fear to the Western Front, and soon the world would argue over whether that fear had a place in war. When the smoke finally cleared at Seicheprey, the battlefield told a story without needing words. Scarred trenches, shattered helmets, rifles tossed aside in panic, and the quiet, eerie stillness that follows only after violence has burned itself out. The Americans, bruised, bloodied, and exhausted, had held their ground against an enemy that believed they would fold. For men like Lloyd Seibert, the aftermath was surreal. He limped through the trenches with bandaged wounds and a shotgun still warm in his hands, staring at the wreckage of a fight that felt less like a battle and more like survival distilled to its rawest form. His bravery would earn him the Medal of Honor, but medals could never fully reflect the weight of what he had witnessed. The frantic breaths, the flashes of muzzle fire in darkness, the sound of German voices shouting one minute and falling silent the next. Yet what happened next stretched far beyond that shattered village in France. As reports filtered back through German command, shock turned to outrage. They drafted formal complaints, arguing the shotgun caused unnecessary suffering and violated the Hague Convention. To them, this was not a weapon. It was a barbaric tool of pain, a throwback to an earlier, crueler age of warfare. Diplomats and officers debated as if the gun itself were a moral question what counted as acceptable killing. Was a body torn by buckshot somehow more offensive than one ripped apart by artillery or burned alive by mustard gas? In September 1918, Germany filed an official diplomatic protest demanding that the shotgun be banned from the battlefield and that any captured American soldiers using it be subject to execution. They framed their argument not only in legality but in moral disgust, calling the trench gun inhumane. The irony hung in the air like lingering smoke, coming from a nation that had pioneered chlorine gas, flamethrowers, and total war tactics. The United States' response arrived swiftly and coldly. Secretary of State Robert Lansing rejected the protest outright, stating that the United States deemed the weapon fully lawful under international rules. Acting Judge Advocate Samuel Ansell went further, making it absolutely clear that if Germany executed any American soldier for carrying a shotgun, the United States would respond in kind, an unmistakable threat that ended the debate. Germany backed down, but the attempt to criminalize the shotgun revealed something deeper: fear. On the front lines, German soldiers whispered about it like a monster in a child's story, something unstoppable, something that could kill faster than a man could think. The psychological impact was permanent. Even after the war dragged on and finally stumbled toward armistice, the legend of the trench gun lived on. And when the guns fell silent on November 11, 1918, the shotgun didn't fade into history, it evolved. It marched ashore with American troops in Normandy, cleared bunkers in the Pacific, echoed across frozen valleys in Korea, and fired through jungle tunnels in Vietnam. The same weapon that Germany once tried to ban became a permanent part of American close-quarters warfare doctrine. For historians, this moment marks a turning point, not just in technology, but in the philosophy of combat. The trench gun proved that war would no longer be fought only at a distance with disciplined rifle volleys or formal charges. Close combat had changed. Future enemies would not fear artillery or rifles as deeply as they feared the sound of a pump-action shotgun cycling in the dark, the warning before devastation. And so, long after Seicheprey crumbled back into quiet countryside, the echoes of that weapon lived on, not just in steel and wood, but in military doctrine, legal precedent, and battlefield psychology. The shotgun had forced the world to ask an uncomfortable question. In a war already soaked in suffering, why was this weapon the one that felt too brutal to accept? In the end, the story of the American trench shotgun isn't just about steel, firepower, or battlefield innovation. It's about what happens when ordinary men are thrown into extraordinary circumstances and must find a way to survive in a place where rules, honor, and distance collapse into brutal, breath-close combat. The Winchester Model 1897 became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of adaptability, courage, and the harsh reality that war does not reward tradition. It rewards what works. The Germans hated it because it shattered their expectations, their doctrine, and their sense of control. But to the Americans using it, especially men like Lloyd Seibert, it was a lifeline, a tool that gave them a fighting chance when the next turn in a trench could mean life or death. The moral, if there is one to extract from the mud and terror of the Western Front, is that survival often depends not on strength alone, but on innovation, resilience, and the willingness to challenge what others believe should never change. War exposes truth, and one truth that echoed from Seicheprey to Normandy, Korea, and Vietnam is simple. The battlefield belongs not to the most noble weapon, but to the one carried with determination and belief by those who refuse to fall. And so this weapon, this simple pump-action shotgun born from civilian hands, earned a legacy Germany never intended, not infamy but respect. Because behind every blast was a soldier far from home, terrified yet unbroken, fighting not for conquest but to live another minute. So now, more than a century later, the question remains for us, not about laws or tactics, but about humanity. In a world that constantly evolves its tools of conflict, do we judge a weapon by its brutality, or by the men who must wield it to survive? In the end, the Germans couldn't ban it, fear couldn't stop it, and time couldn't erase it. The trench shotgun proved that sometimes the simplest tool can reshape the battlefield and rewrite military thinking. From the mud of Seicheprey to the jungles of Vietnam, its legacy marched forward not as a symbol of cruelty, but as a reminder that in war, survival favors those who adapt, innovate, and refuse to fight by someone else's rules. The Germans hated it because it changed the terms of close-quarters combat forever. America kept it because it worked when nothing else could. One brutal weapon, one desperate battlefield, one undeniable truth. The Winchester Model 1897 didn't just fire shells. It fired fear, respect, and a new era of warfare. And its echo still reaches across history like a final, unanswerable blast.